Good stuff, guys. We're halfway through. We go back to the beginning, which means that we're going to have an initial take from Josh. But Matt, go ahead and run the numbers for album number 4 for us.
Okay, so the Ocean Blue self-titled album comes in at number 2,749 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums. Number 276 in 1989, number 20,099 of all time. It is the Ocean Blues highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. It did not make Rolling Stone's list, and the Ocean Blue is ranked number 5,365 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums. John, where did we get this? Is a very low rated album, at least by these numbers. Where did
It
you
was, I
find this,
believe,
John?
on either Pitchfork or Slant, top albums of the
Okay.
80s, I think is where this
So
was in.
some
Yep.
so some dissenting opinions in the
This was
Pitchfork and
added like
Slant
when we
world.
expanded out the format a little bit. I went looking for bands that I didn't know that were on these lists, and especially in episodes where most of the stuff we knew. It's interesting it ended up on this one because this is filled with sort of deeper cut bands, so normally it wouldn't be one. But when we decided to go very faithfully to years,
Yeah.
they kind of just bundled together, as
Yeah.
opposed to the original format. So that's it. So real quickly, and once again, I'd like to credit all music for this. We normally don't run bios on Cold List and Hot Take, but because some of these are deeper cuts, I wanted to give a little bit of a bio. Ocean Blue was formed in Hershey, Pennsylvania in 1986. The original group featured singer-guitarist I can't pronounce, Schelzel, Schelzel. I checked the
Chazelle,
pronunciation
maybe?
too. I saw it pronounced as Schelzel is how it was said online, but I reserve the right to be incorrect with that. I did do a little bit of homework though to see it, so if it's being mispronounced, it was mispronounced in other venues too. Keyboardist Steve Lau, Lau, bassist Bobby Mitton, and temporary drummer Scott Stauffer. They were all friends since junior high. And they kind of had the same playlist, guys. They liked U2, The Smiths, REM, and Echo and the Bunnymen.
You don't
I
say.
don't think that is a surprise. While still in school, they recorded some demos. So they were in high school. They were a high school band. And they actually ended up getting played on Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, which you may know for the Amish, right? And stuff like that
Yeah.
in that area. Lancaster Christian Radio. And they end up getting their first break there. They eventually instead of a temporary drummer, they add drummer Rob Minig to the band, and they sign with Sire Records for their first album. So they were able to secure a deal, probably a little bit riding the zeitgeist in terms of who they sound like. And they actually end up reaching the Billboard 200 with this album, which was a favorite on budding alternative rock stations, which pretty much I think we can use alternative rock and college rock radio as the same at this point. There was
Yeah.
not an alternative format in 1989. That didn't come till pretty much, the early to mid 90s as even an idea. So that kind of takes you a little bit to what led up to this. This is a debut. So, and they are very young here. Remember, they formed in 1986 when they were in high school, and this is 1989. So they're basically college age at this point in time. So there you go. A little bit of an overview. Josh, what were your thoughts?
Well, imitation's the sincerest form of flattery, so that's what this band is is doing when I listen to it. I really enjoyed the album. They wear their influences on their sleeves and in their sound, and it's incredibly obvious for anyone that's listened to as much music as we have for this show. The Smiths, REM, and Echo and the Bunnymen all came to mind right away when I was listening to this album.
Well, and the guitar playing is basically the edge.
Yeah.
Like the style, yeah, is like right
Yeah,
there.
they sound so much like those bands that I did not realize they were American at first. I thought for sure that they were a British band. They are singing vocally like they have an accent, so it's very that threw me for a curve at first. And they have this kind of gentle sound to them. It's very pleasant. They have the jangly guitar elements that we're fond of referencing. There is a lot of nice melodies. I would almost classify this band as like a sophistopop band at times, but I think they are grounded in their references and melodies and some good guitar work that really works for me. This band has a really summery feel to them for me. It's a real good like outdoor kind of laying in the shade type of album. They are they have like a clean sound. There's kind of like they have like an echo to them at times in their guitar sound, or kind of the way that they sing the harmonies or the backing vocals, and they come in, they kind of sound like they're in the distance somewhere. They throw in a saxophone on one song, Drifting Falling, which I enjoyed. And they've got this kind of mellow, chill, pleasant vibe to them. They add one of my favorite songs on this album is Love Song, which is kind of in the middle of the album. It's got this poppy feel to it. They incorporate some like whoa whoa whoas, and they add some like onomatopoeia in their singing that really works for me. And it's like this mishmash of all these other bands that we are really high on, and that was enough to kind of make this a hidden gem, not knowing this band at all, and really kind of really enjoying this album both times I listened to it. So thumbs up for me. There's some other tracks on here that I can recommend, like Between Something and Nothing, which is the opening track, and even like the next track, Vanity Fair, which I really liked, and sorry, Drifting and Falling, which is the third track. That was another one I really liked. So really kind of right off the right from the jump, they hooked me in, and it was enough to carry me for the rest of the album. So thumbs up.
Matt, thoughts?
Hang on, sorry. Was he cutting out for you there, John, or was that just me?
He wasn't cutting out for me.
All right, hang on. I'm gonna come back in. I think I'm having issues.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Yeah. First, I thought it was on my end. So, all right, we'll pick up here. Yeah. So, Josh, it's very. I have a lot of similar takes as you as far as how this sounds. I mean, it's clearly, to the point where actually Sherry thought we were doing another Smiths record. She's like, "Oh, right. I was like, "No, it's not the Smiths." She thought it sounded like Morrissey. So, this is an easy listen. Like, it's pleasant, right? Like from the get-go, the production, the guitar sound, the melody. There's a lot of great melodies on here. The bass is really up front as well. It's kind of, that's another way it's, to me, how it was reminiscent of a band like the Smiths that had really good bass lines and put that up front and made that kind of like a driving melodic aspect of the song. A lot like, the Smiths did, a lot like the Beatles with McCartney's bass playing in the Beatles. So certainly I'm going to be hooked in on that stuff, as well. And yeah, I was surprised to learn they weren't British. I mean, they totally sound. I'm like, Hershey, Pennsylvania. Like, you can't get more American than that, So, so that was interesting. It's also interesting that it's such a young. I did see that as well. That I think they were in high school and they signed their first record deal or something like that. So, but yeah, again, there's jangle guitar in here. There's kind of, it's a little dream poppy. It's like got the reverb up and
more than a little.
Yeah,
I was actually surprised you guys took this long to say that, because I thought it had a lot of dream pop.
Well, the dream pop, yeah, I think it's I don't know. There was more guitar and bass in here. Like dream pop is more. I typically see that as being more synth heavy.
It's dream pop adjacent, John. Let's be.
Post dream pop.
Yeah. So, it does, but great production, I really like that. It did, my biggest complaint is that it got a little samey. So I was comparing them a little bit in terms of my reaction of like, this is a band I never heard of, and to really just liking it pretty much immediately. It's very similar with the Mekons. It was like, wow, it's two bands. It's like right up my alley. But I thought the Mekons stood out more because of the variety and the different directions that it went. This kind of stayed in its lane. And after, it's one of those things where it's like having a really good dessert or whatever at the beginning. You're like, oh, this is great, I really like this, and then by the time you get towards the end, you're like, all right, I had too much. So I would probably chop off a couple of songs on this just to kind of make it a little I don't think it needs to be this long, and I think also the songs as it went along got a little weaker than the ones that I thought the first half was stronger. But for a debut album from a couple of kids that were pretty much right out of high school, it's a great album, and if you're gonna take cues from bands, you might as well take them from the Smiths and U2 and Echo and the Bunnymen, especially at this time, in the late '80s. Very easy to listen to. Nothing groundbreaking, but definitely worth a thumbs up, I would say.
Yeah, I kind of had to take Matt. Like, I remember you said the first time, a couple times you listened to Murmur, you felt that way. They kind of all ran together, and then over
Yep.
time, it kind of did it. I might have had the same take with you the first time I listened to this, but then as I listened to it more times, I started to differentiate the
Okay.
songs. I don't know if I totally agree that the album gets worse as it goes on, because like a song like Myron, song 11, I really thought was a strong song. I also thought the song Ask Me John was one of the standouts on this, which was song 8. So some of the ones I like the most are kind of later in the album. I won't disagree, though, that there is a formula they have, and you guys have already covered the bands entirely. But I think what was so interesting about them is within the formula, it was like instrument to instrument. It was like making like a Voltron of like different, like it was the Smiths. It was basically, Andy Rorick's bass, like the Smiths bass, like that, rollicking bass, right? Like right out in the front, right? Then it was the Edge's lead guitar, right, with the space and the angularity of it. Then it had, to me, like a dream pop style vocal. So you're having like sort of the dream pop vocal mixed with like the Smiths slash Cure type bass with the U2 lead guitar, and then the drums sort of just kept the time, in the
Yeah.
way that traditional jangle pop guitars, or I mean drums, excuse me, would. That they're waiting for the guitar to weave around them, kind of. But in this case, both the bass line and the guitar were in their own way moving around the drums, and that was sort of the style they stayed in the whole time. And that most reminded me of Echo and the Bunnymen, which it was when I laughed, I was like, well, that's sort of the same exact formula, right? That Echo and the Bunnymen had. Outside of, I don't know if the bass lines were so aggressively in the front all the time with Echo and the Bunnymen as they are here, right? And some of that is because we covered multiple Echo and the Bunnymen albums, and I thought there were pretty key differences between them along the way. So I can't say that they had a distinctive sound, but that was sort of what it was. The other thing this reminded me of is you could have put this band in like the mid 2000s, like really from the influences. There were a lot of bands that sounded like this in that like mid 2000s rock period. Like there were times when this band sounded like the Kooks, remember that band and stuff that were there, and there's times where I heard a little bit of Phoenix in this band, and there were just a lot of groups in the 2000s that sort of had the same influences. And if I told you this album was from 2006, would you have been completely surprised if I told you that? You would have been like, oh, these guys just listened to, and the only reason you might have been able to tell that it's from 89 is because some of the production sounds a little bit older and less maybe balanced and electronically synced, right? That's something that was released in like 2006. But unless you had that knowledge, you would think like this could be a band that was just sort of influenced in the same lane as those groups in the 2000s. This band also at times, especially on the first track, sounded like the band Pulp, who we haven't covered yet. There's a lot of overlap between this band and Pulp, so I wanted to give a couple different takes for people that might be familiar. But yeah, this is an easy thumbs up for me. You always want to not give a thumbs up to something that feels derivative, but while this clearly, as Josh said, wore the influences on the sleeve and some that might be a turnoff for, I thought they did just enough differently in how the package came together that they stood out on their own. And as a result, I just, this is a style of music that's very appealing to me. And so if it's much easier to accept an album that maybe revisits some of the same tropes if it just sounds really good to your ears.
Yeah.
And like I have a musical like bias toward this style of music, like jangle pop, you know, good bass lines. I like dream pop, right? So the vocals being dream pop gives a little bit more of that aesthetic to it, which is a nice mix with the jangle pop. And yeah, it's very good music when I want to relax and be in a good mood. I can put
Yep.
this also on in almost any aspect of, I could just as easy put this on sitting on the porch as I could driving in the car, as I could if I was running on the treadmill, if you know what I mean, seeing
Yep.
it live. It's very versatile music for me, which is cool because not a lot of stuff we cover on the podcast can be that versatile in so many lanes. Like there's certain times where like I'll listen to an album and I'll like I'm in the wrong context for this. And I'm like, okay, I got to resituate myself as we go along. Like I never felt this that way about this album listening to it. So yeah, really like this one. Thumbs up.
Yeah, another word that just popped into mind is pastoral. That's kind of like how it sounds to me in a lot of ways. And also I want to make a distinction about they sound like the Smiths, but the lyrical content is not on the level of Morrissey, and kind of the humor and the wit that's not here. So I just want to be clear that it's not like they're
I don't think the
that
guys
level.
sound. They sound like Smith songs, but I think they sound like the Smith songs more from the rhythm section than they do
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
guitar, the Johnny Marr guitar, or Morrissey's voice. Like to me, what makes them sound like the Smiths is the rhythm section, which I've always said is the most underrated part of the Smiths.
Yeah, I mean, it might be. Yeah, I think we're splitting hairs in terms of what we know to sound, what a Smith song sounds like, or what we're picking up to make a Smith song. But I'm just saying, in terms of lyrical, it's not that. There's no comparison to that. So.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like some critics, if I had more of a critic inclination, right, I might deduct some points on my score from this because it might be derivative, but I'm not a critic, so this will be a highly rated album on my list because I just freaking enjoyed listening to this album. Sometimes you just want to listen to an album that just hits you, and I don't need it to reinvent the wheel. Like if it's a style I like and they do just enough different, you know what I mean? It's like when we talk about those sort of the pop rock bands, right? Like what would we call it? Like Big Star and stuff. What's the power pop, right? Bands. Sometimes I don't need them to totally transcend the genre. I just want them to be really good at the genre, and so that's how I felt about this. So.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, and I go back to like saying, I think that if you are like something like the Young Gods, that's pushing boundaries, that's interesting, you give them credit even if you don't like the music, you're like, okay, that stands apart for me. But if you're a band that does something more derivative, I don't think that in and of itself makes me go, oh, I'm not as interested. If you do it well, which these guys clearly are doing well, then I mean, all those bands that we mentioned that it sounds like this, it sounds like that, well, then it's gonna be, if that's what it's reminding you of, and the songs are there to back it up, which I think they are. It's a good album, right? And you're right, John. There's a familiarity here. It's a very easy album to just put on. I like you're using the word versatile, just at any time, right? We talk often about albums like this is a night album, or this is an album that you need to listen to with headphones, or I need to be in this type of mood or whatever. And I love music you put on whenever, man. Like that there's something about that just is nice to have. It's like old familiar friend, So yeah, you're right, John. I did have that reaction with Murmur, and I only listened to this album 2 or 3 times, I think. So perhaps that could happen as well. I mean, just like anything else, right? The more you listen to something, the more familiar you are with it, the more you see into it. It was just kind of my initial reaction, but yeah, and also I was juxtaposing it with the Mekon's record, which that stood out because of its variety, where this is kind of stayed in its lane. And I think that if an album like this or like a Murmur, at least for me, is something I would need to spend a little bit more time with before I could start to parse out different aspects of the songs. But that's I still don't think that takes anything majorly away from this. It was a very easy thumbs up.
Yeah.
I like a musical landscape with both the pleasant and the challenging. I don't think I'd want an environment that was just pleasant all the time, and I wouldn't want one that was challenging all the time. I do really feel like what I like about music is a mix of stuff that appeals to me as art, right? And maybe even, you know, can grow on me and challenge me, or even if I don't like love it, like I love piecing together what artists I may like drew from stuff and the lineage of stuff. And then there's stuff I want to listen to just because it complements my life or complements the scene or hits the ear well, right? And so I'm actually very glad that both exist. And I think the world would be a worse place if, like, I can never understand people that only want to listen to pleasant music all the time, but I also can't understand somebody who would want to never listen to anything that hit their ear pretty, you know?
Right. That would be a weird psycho person that only wants to listen to challenging music all the time, in my opinion.
Yeah. So there's people like that, though. So, okay.
Good stuff.